today's video, I'm going to tell you why practicing with a harmon mute is actually very effective. And I mean actually practicing with it for multiple sessions the entire time. You might think that this is a weird thing to do, but there's a lot of reasons why you might want to try this. So let's start with the first and the most obvious one. If you need to use a practice mute because it's too loud when you start playing the trumpet for real in your apartment or wherever it is that you're practicing and bothering people, you might start to play different because you know that you're bothering people, and so you're not going to go at it the way that you should, and so you're going to want to mute anyways. And using a practice mute, an actual practice mute, the big issue with them is that there's too much resistance. It's so stuffy that you're going to start developing these weird habits when you start playing, and intonation issues are going to start to happen because it's just too closed off. Now, there are better practice mutes than others, but why not just use a harmon mute, a bubble mute? These put you in a position where, one, it's not crazy loud, and it shouldn't really bother anyone if it's at a reasonable time of the day. Now, even if it's really late at night, you could still muffle the sound of this by simply putting it over some sheets or something. You stack a bunch of pillows, play into that over the sheets. Nobody's going to hear you. I've done that in hotel rooms all the time. So that's reason number one, if you need to get and play quieter in general. But there's actually a beneficial effect to playing with a harmon mute, bubble mute, that we haven't talked about, which is what it does for your chops specifically. Now, you might be thinking, what could it possibly do for your chops, Jesse? Well, just like we were saying too much resistance is bad when you are using a normal practice mute, well, any mute is going to add some resistance. And what happens with a bubble mute is that it adds some resistance, and that can actually be very good for a couple of reasons. One, it'll get you to back off. It'll teach you to not play with so much force, aggression, which means that you will play more naturally and you won't be so susceptible to using excess mouthpiece pressure, which will cause you to spiral into the trumpet death spiral. The trumpet death spiral is very simple. You play too loud, which makes you do what? Use more mouthpiece pressure. Then what does that do? It makes it so that your lips stop responding. And then what does that do? Makes it so that you have to blow more air. And then what does that do? Right? And the cycle keeps going. And you can start this cycle in any one of those spots. And so to avoid this, ideally, you don't want to break any of those three rules, right? You don't want to use too much mouthpiece pressure, you don't want to overblow, and you want to make sure that your lips are responding. And so the harmon mute has a lot, the bubble mute, harmon mute, I'm used to calling them harmon mutes, but I think that's actually a brand. So bubble mute is what we'll call it, if I can remember. Now, you want to play more naturally. And how does this help you do it? Well, the extra resistance, like I said, is going to help you a little bit just on a technical front. It makes it a little bit easier to play, but also that causes some restrictions. If you try to force the mute, it won't let you, right? Have you ever tried to play one of these mutes really, really loud? It doesn't like it at all. And you start to have to really blow a lot of air to do that. And hopefully, if you're smart, that teaches you something. It teaches you, hey, whoa, we don't need to do that. Let's back off. So if you overblow this, not only is it going to feel bad, it's going to sound bad too, right? You can hear that the mute doesn't want to go there. It's just too much. It's overloading it. And if you listen for that, you're going to be in a good place. Because if you undershoot it as well, you play too soft, too quiet, the mute just won't resonate. It won't vibrate the right way. So there's that distinctive ping and sound that happens when you're playing this correctly. And we all know what that sounds like, right? You've heard those smooth jazz albums, or you've heard a trumpet player playing some great jazz on it, and you know exactly what that ping, what that characteristic sound that you get out of this mute is. Listen for that. And the great thing is that it doesn't matter what register you're in, you can listen for that, and it's super obvious when you're doing it correctly. And so if you can line up with that constantly by practicing with this mute on more often, then guess what? You're learning how to pace yourself on the instrument, which is fantastic because then you're not going to get as tired because you're not forcing things, right? Just like a runner has to pace himself. He can't just run 2 minutes faster than he normally runs, or he's just going to get tired. It's the same way with trumpet. If you're used to just gunning it, triple forte, double forte all the time, you're going to have pacing issues, and then you're going to think that that's an endurance issue or a chop issue, and it may be that, right? It could be that, but maybe it's not. Maybe you're just constantly overdoing it at a pace that you cannot manage, right? You can only sprint for so long, so this can help you learn how not to sprint. Can you do this with other ways? Yeah, sure. You can get a piccolo trumpet. It'll probably teach you the same thing because, again, more resistance. Do you have access to a piccolo trumpet? Probably not. You guarantee you have access to one of these because they're not super expensive. So you can do that. That and learning how to play a piccolo trumpet is a whole other set of skill, right? It definitely feels a lot different. Whereas at least with this kind of mute, it serves two purposes, right? When you do actually have to use the mute in a performance, a gig, a rehearsal, you're going to sound much better on it and much more in tune because you're used to working on it that way. And you get the added bonus of learning how to back off, not use so much power, aggression, mouthpiece force, and all of that because the mute just simply won't let you, right? So it's teaching you the proper habits without having to have somebody there to scold you or yourself to scold yourself. And it's nice. It's really effective. You can also do this, by the way, if you have access to a trumpet that maybe is a little bit more resistant than what you normally play on. But then you have to listen out for other things. What I really like about the mute in specific to solve this problem, to kind of maybe not solve it, but at least help it, is that you have that feedback, constant feedback. The feedback you get from the trumpet is great because you hear the sound, but there's other things involved when you're listening on the trumpet, right? And it's harder to listen for those cues of the overtones or the exact timbre that you're looking for on the instrument because you can change so much when you're actually playing the horn without a mute in. But when it's got this bad boy in, it adds some limitations that actually quite help you. And so those would be the two big reasons. Practice mute, substitute, much better than a practice mute in my opinion, and to learn how to play at a reasonable pace so that you're not just getting completely wiped out and exhausted all the time. If you do that consistently, you will gain the muscle memory necessary to make sure that you're not going on overdrive all the time. And then you might be asking, well, how do I stop? When do I stop practicing that way? When have I learned the lesson? When it's a habit, right? So pretend these are training wheels. Go to this every once in a while after you've been doing this for a couple of weeks, right? Then go to this for one session, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Does it feel the same when you play this? Or are you starting to overblow when you do this again, right? Because it's not the same, right? So you have to play these a little bit different. So can you play this one by itself while it feels like this one? It's not going to be the exact same, but you want to play it that way, right? With that minimalist energy that you learned how to do with this. Hope it helps.